I wasn't supposed to stay long that night. Just a quick stop to drop off the rent envelope before my evening run. But Nora's shop was still lit, warm against the wet dusk, and something in me slowed as I reached the door. The bell over the frame gave its soft, crooked chime. She looked up from the counter, a book half open in her hand, and smiled like she'd been expecting no one and me all at once. "You're early," she said. "Or you're late," I offered back. Her laugh was low, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the movement small but deliberate, and the moment stretched, just enough for me to notice the faint ink smudge on her thumb, the slow tap of her ring finger against the counter. I set the envelope down. "Figured I'd save you a trip upstairs." "Efficient," she said. "Dangerous quality in a tenant. People start expecting things." We talked about nothing for a while. A shipment of used poetry books that smelled like rain, the sudden heat wave, the coffee across the street she swore was better even though it never was. She remembered my order, black with a splash of oat milk, and teased me for still pretending it wasn't basically a latte. I folded a receipt into a crooked square, unfolding it again when she looked away. Outside, traffic hissed across wet pavement. Inside, time thinned. I noticed the tiny details before I let myself call it attraction. The way her eyes lingered on the window before answering a question, like she was measuring what to reveal. The quiet drop of her shoulders when she finally exhaled. The smell of paper and her lavender lotion mixing in the air. We hovered there, two people with nowhere urgent to be. I asked if she ever closed early. "Sometimes," she said, "but only when someone gives me a reason." The words landed softer than they should have, like they were meant for the floor between us. I checked my phone even though no one was waiting. An unsent text to an old friend sat half-typed. It felt easier to stay here, in this small light, than to finish anything. She finally slid my rent envelope closer to her side. "You should go before the rain starts again." "Right?" I said, but neither of us moved. When I did reach for the door, she followed, switching off one lamp as we passed. The sudden dimness made the streetlight outside feel closer. We stood at the threshold, a little too near. Her eyes flicked to my hands, then back to the street. "Good night, Eli." "Night, Nora." It should have ended there. A small nod, a creak of the door, the usual. But she stepped forward, closing the gap like it was the most natural thing in the world, and wrapped me in a hug that carried more weight than the day required. Her hair brushed my cheek, warm and faintly damp from the evening air. And just before I could pull back, she tilted her face and kissed me, slow, certain, like she'd been waiting through a dozen late nights for this exact mistake. I stood there, stunned, heartbeat stuttering against the smell of rain and paper. When she finally stepped back, she didn't explain, only whispered, "Lock up after you," and disappeared into the darkened shop, leaving the door and 1,000 questions half open behind her. The next evening, I told myself I was only stopping by for a book I'd forgotten to return. A harmless excuse, even though I'd read the last page twice already. The shop smelled like cedar and warm paper again. Nora was on a stool, reaching for a stack of novels on the top shelf. Her sweater slid up as she stretched. I looked away too late. "Back so soon," she said, climbing down without hurry. "Thought I owed you a book," I said, holding it out like a shield. She smiled, faint but knowing. "You don't owe me anything." Her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before. I helped her move a heavy box to the back corner. The cardboard scraped across the floor, the sound too loud for the quiet. She made tea while I stacked the books, steam curling between us like it had its own agenda. When she handed me a cup, our fingers brushed. Her eyes caught mine for half a second longer than polite. "Chamomile," she said. "Helps with nights that don't end when they should." I asked if that was a problem for her. "Sometimes," she admitted. "The shop keeps me up. Or maybe it's the silence after." She sat on the edge of the counter, legs crossed, tea cradled close. I leaned against a shelf, pretending to study the spines. "You've been here, what, 3 months?" she asked. "Almost," I said. "Feels shorter." The way she said it left a space I didn't know how to fill. To keep from staring, I told her about the move that brought me here. How my program was supposed to feel like progress, but mostly felt like standing still. How I'd left someone behind without really saying goodbye. Words I hadn't planned to share slipped out anyway. She listened quietly, thumbs circling the rim of her cup. Standing still isn't always wasted, she said. Sometimes it's just catching your breath. I wanted to ask if that's what she was doing. If this shop, this careful life, was her breath. But the question felt too close to the skin. Instead, I asked if she'd always lived here. Mostly, she said. Married once. Briefly. He liked the idea of a bookstore more than the reality. The admission hung between us, heavy and ordinary at the same time. I pictured a younger version of her, someone's wife, someone's plan, and felt a sudden, unreasonable anger toward a man I'd never meet. Silence stretched, filled only by the faint tick of the wall clock. I wondered if she was thinking about the kiss, if she regretted it, if she would ever mention it first. When I stood to leave, she reached out, not for me, but for the empty cup in my hand. Her fingers closed around it, brushing my knuckles, then stayed a beat too long. I'll keep this, she said. For the cup or the moment, I couldn't tell. I don't know why that instant stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me and didn't look away. Rain returned 2 nights later, a thin, steady sheet against the shop windows. I lingered by the door, pretending to browse a shelf I'd passed 100 times. Nora was at the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned loosely. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen, like the day had asked too much and she'd given it anyway. Rough night? I asked. She shrugged. Just long. Her eyes flicked to the window. You should be out with people your age, not here keeping me company. The words landed harder than they should have. I almost laughed. Almost. I like it here, I said, but softer than I meant. She wiped her hands on a towel, not looking at me. That's not the point. Something tightened in the room. The bell over the door broke it. 2 students ducked in, loud with damp coats and weakened energy. Their chatter filled the air, all light and careless. Nora smiled for them, the polite kind, while I stood useless by the fiction shelf. I watched her help them find a title, watched the easy way she kept a small distance. When they left, the shop felt smaller. She locked the door behind them, though closing time was still half an hour away. I started. You can stay, she said quickly, then softer, if you want. The rain sharpened outside. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed now, but her foot tapped an uneven rhythm. I keep thinking I should, she began, then stopped. I moved closer, drawn without permission. Close enough to smell the tea from earlier, faint lavender clinging to her sweater. You don't have to explain, I said. Her eyes met mine, startled, like I'd named something we were both pretending not to know. A car horn blared outside, breaking the thread. She stepped back, brushing past me to straighten a crooked stack of books that didn't need it. The small motion felt like a wall. I stayed where I was, palms damp. Words crowded my throat, questions, confessions, but none made it past a breath. You should get home before it gets worse, she said finally, still facing the shelf. I nodded, but didn't move. She turned, slow, like she'd been waiting for me to decide. For a heartbeat we stood there, 2 steps apart, everything unsaid stretching in the space between. I reached for her elbow without thinking. She didn't pull away. Her eyes dropped to my hand, then back up, a flicker of something. Fear, want, both. For a second the world narrowed. The rain, the ticking clock, her breath against mine. Then she eased her arm free, gentle, almost apologetic. Good night, Eli, she whispered. The sound of my name in her voice felt closer than any touch. I left before I forgot how to stop. The rain finally broke into a late summer heat that felt heavier than the clouds ever did. I found Nora locking the shop earlier than usual, the key turning slow in her hand. She glanced up when I approached, a flicker of surprise, maybe relief. Walking home, I asked. Thought I'd try it before the air gets thick again, she said, tucking her keys into her pocket. We fell into step along the quiet street. The smell of wet pavement still lingered, mixing with warm asphalt. She carried a paper bag of unsold paperbacks, the corners soft from too many hands. "You could have asked me to help," I said. "I'm used to carrying things," she answered, not meeting my eyes. We walked without talking for a block. I kept catching her reflection in dark windows, her shoulders slightly forward, like she was bracing for something. "Are you avoiding me?" I finally asked, more abrupt than I meant. She slowed but didn't stop. "No, I'm trying not to make this harder than it already is." The words tightened my chest. "What's hard about it?" She gave a dry laugh. "Eli, come on." I looked at her then, really looked, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her grip whitened on the paper bag. It wasn't just age. It was the weight of knowing better. "I keep thinking about that night," I said quietly. She didn't answer. "I don't know what it meant to you," I added. Her steps slowed again. "It meant I forgot myself," she said. "And I can't afford to keep forgetting." We reached a small park bench near the river. She set the bag down and sat, hands clasped. I stayed standing, unsure whether to move closer or leave. "Do you think I don't feel it?" she asked finally. The question startled me. She looked up, eyes sharp in the fading light. "You're 24. I'm not. I rent you a home. People talk." And her voice caught. She pressed a palm to her forehead. "I like the way you see me. It scares me how much." The air thickened. I sat beside her, knees almost touching. "I don't care about people talking," I said. "That's because they're not talking about you," she whispered. A barge moved down the river, its low horn rumbling through the silence. I wanted to tell her that none of it mattered, that the nights in the shop, the quiet tea, the kiss that still lived in my skin were the only things that felt real. Instead, I said, "Then what do we do?" She turned, eyes soft but unreadable. The distance between us felt like one breath. Her hand twitched against her knee, almost reaching. "Do we stop before it starts?" she said. Or? The question hung there, unfinished, waiting for an answer neither of us seemed ready to give. The next few days slipped by without pattern. I stopped by the shop at my usual hour, but the lights were dark. A handwritten sign, "Closed for inventory," hung crooked in the window. No date, no explanation. I checked again the following evening. Same sign, same silence. At first I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she needed a break. Maybe real inventory. But the absence started to feel personal, like a door quietly locked from the inside. I texted once, "Everything okay?" The bubble turned blue. No reply. I typed another, "Need help with the shop?" Then deleted it before sending. By the third night, I found myself pacing the upstairs apartment, listening for sounds beneath the floorboards. Nothing but the hum of the fridge and the soft tick of the ceiling pipes. Hope and confusion traded places every few minutes. Maybe she was avoiding me. Maybe she regretted every late-night conversation, every accidental touch. Or maybe, my chest tightened, something had happened. On the fourth day, I finally saw her. Through the rain-streaked window of the corner cafe, a flash of familiar hair bent over a table. Across from her sat a teenage girl, maybe 16, maybe younger. They shared the same eyes. The girl laughed at something, a sound muffled by glass. Nora reached across the table, smoothing a strand of hair behind the girl's ear with the same gentle precision I'd felt in her touch. I stood outside longer than I should have, damp air clinging to my jacket. The girl gathered her things, hugged Nora quickly, and left with a wave. Mother and daughter. That was the only explanation that fit. A life she'd never mentioned. When Nora finally looked toward the window, I stepped back into the shadow of a street lamp, heart hammering like I'd been caught doing something wrong. She scanned the street once, expression unreadable, then turned away. I walked home without entering the cafe. Every step felt like a question I couldn't frame. Upstairs, I drafted a message. "I saw you today." I didn't know. Deleted it. Typed again. "Do you want to talk?" Deleted that too. The room smelled of rain and old paper. I sat on the floor, back against the cold radiator, phone heavy in my palm. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Below me, the shop remained dark. I imagined her locking the door, switching off the final lamp, carrying secrets up the narrow stairs to a room I'd never see. My thumb hovered over the send button until the screen dimmed to black. The message stayed unsent. The night stayed quiet that I found the shop light on again the following evening, a soft amber glow against the thinning dusk. My heart thudded harder than it should for a simple open sign. Inside, Nora stood behind the counter with a half-sorted stack of returns. She looked up the moment I entered. No surprise, no startle, just a breath she'd been holding too long. "You're back," I said, voice rough. "I never left," she answered, though the faint tremor in her words betrayed the lie. The air between us held 100 unsent messages. I stepped closer, careful, until the scent of tea and old paper wrapped around me. "I saw you," I said quietly. "At the cafe." Her shoulders tightened. She set a book down, slow and precise. "My daughter," she said, almost a whisper. "She's beautiful," I managed. A pause. "She lives with her father," she added. "Visiting before school starts." "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think I was." She stopped, searching. "Already claimed," I offered. Her eyes flicked to mine, startled. "It's not that. I don't know what this is, or what it's supposed to be." I leaned against the counter, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of her mouth, the way her fingers gripped the edge. "I don't either," I said. "But I keep thinking about that night. And every night after." She exhaled, a sound like surrender. I told myself the kiss was a mistake, that it was just loneliness, curiosity. I thought closing the shop would make it fade. Her voice dropped lower. It didn't. The confession settled between us, quiet but heavy. "I'm scared," she said. "Of what?" "Of wanting something I can't explain. Of being seen and then regretted." I reached across the counter, palm open. Her eyes followed the movement, hesitating. Then she slid her hand into mine. Warm, trembling. "No regrets," I said. "Not with you." For a moment we stayed like that. The hum of the overhead lights the only sound. It wasn't a promise, not really. Just two people admitting the same ache. Finally she squeezed my hand and pulled back, slow, deliberate. "We still have to live with whatever this is," she said. "I know. Are you ready for that?" The question landed like a soft challenge. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped around the counter until we stood side by side, shoulders nearly touching. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," I said, "but I'm here. Tonight." She turned to me then, eyes wet but steady. After a long silence, she nodded, just once. "Okay," she said. It wasn't an ending. It was the smallest beginning, spoken like a secret we'd both finally decided to keep. The summer tilted quietly into autumn. Classes started, tourists thinned, and the shop's window display filled with paperbacks that smelled faintly of rain. Some nights I stayed upstairs grading maps until past midnight. Other nights I found myself downstairs at 8:47 a.m., the first customer waiting for the door to unlock. Nora no longer pretended to be surprised when she saw me early. Sometimes she handed me a black coffee before I asked, steam curling against the crisp morning air. Other times she brewed chamomile and teased me for switching sides. We didn't need a reason to be in the same room anymore. The tension that once sparked between every glance had softened into something steadier. I still caught the small details. Her thumb circling the rim of a cup, the tiny crease between her brows when a shipment ran late. But they no longer felt dangerous. They just felt like her. One cool Saturday, we walked to the river again. The same bench waited near the water, the wood damp from an overnight drizzle. She set down a paper bag of books we'd bought from a street vendor and sat without asking. I joined her, our knees brushing lightly. "I keep thinking about the first time we sat here," I said. "You accused me of avoiding you," she reminded, smiling. "You were," I said. She tilted her head. "Maybe I was. Maybe I wasn't ready to like you yet." The honesty was gentle, almost playful. We sat in the quiet, watching a barge slide past with the same low horn I remembered. A small gust lifted a strand of her hair across my shoulder. Neither of us moved it right away. Life had found its rhythm. Her daughter visited on weekends now, sometimes joining us for breakfast. I helped with late-night shipments and the stubborn lock on the back door. She came to my final presentation at the university and sat in the back, eyes proud but private. We never named what we were. There was no declaration, no future drawn in bold lines. But when I left my cup beside hers each morning, or when she touched my arm lightly before turning off the lights at night, it felt like enough. As the sun lowered behind the water, she leaned into me just enough to share warmth. "Remember that night you almost left without locking the door?" she asked. I nodded. "I think that's when I knew," she said. "Knew what?" "That I wanted you to stay." Her words landed like a quiet truth we both carried for months. I didn't answer. I just let my shoulder rest against hers until the sky turned the color of old paper. "What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?"